This video is about factoring trinomials. So looking at this problem, right now this is not a factoring problem. This is solely to help us understand what we're doing when we are factoring. So this problem is a multiplication problem, and usually we call it a FOIL problem or a distribution problem. All just ways to remember, hey, we're multiplying a whole bunch of stuff together. We do 3x times x to get 3x squared. 3x times 5 to get 15x. Negative 2 times x to get negative 2x. And negative 2 times 5 to get negative 10. So notice we have some like terms to combine. We need to do our 15x plus our 2x to get a 13x. Now this process of FOILing brought us to this final answer of 3x squared plus 13x plus or minus 10. And the process of factoring is to try and do this backwards. So where this was a multiplication problem, factoring is really a division problem. But it's a very, very fancy type of division. So complicated, in fact, that we can't just explain it in one step. So when you're doing a problem like this, we're trying to ultimately get it to look like a FOIL problem. That's our goal this time, get it to have these parentheses. So to do this process, first we start by multiplying the first term times the last term. 6x squared times negative 5 is negative 30x. Now this is what we're going to use to figure out how to make the middle term. So we want numbers that multiply to be a negative 30x squared. I forgot to write the squared on the x. But add to be this negative 7. I'm going to go back to the previous page for a second. We had these two numbers, the 15 and the 2, that combined to be the 13. We're trying to find those numbers. So we have to go through all the possible combinations. Things that multiply to be negative 30. How about negative 30 times 1? And since there's an x squared, we should actually say negative 30x times 1x. That would definitely give me negative 30x squared. So now we go check our addition. Negative 30x plus 1x. So if I were to add those together, it gives me negative 29x. That is not what I want. I want a negative 7x. Those set of factors did not work, so I have to move on. And the reason we start with multiplication is because the multiplication is limited. Addition, I would be adding numbers forever, trying to figure out what would also multiply to be negative 30x squared. Multiplication is more limited. So now I'm going to try something else. Negative 30 could also be negative 15x times positive 2x. That would give me negative 13, we're multiplying here, negative 30x squared. But if I try and add them, this is where my negative 13x comes into play. Also not what we're looking for. So we try something else. How about 10 and 3? What if I did positive 10x and negative 3x? That does give me my negative 30x squared. But if I add them, 10x plus negative 3x, I get a positive 7x, which is so close to what I want, but I wanted a negative 7x. There's a really easy fix for that. If I just switch where my negative sign is, then when I add them, it comes out to be the negative 7x that I want. So we did that whole process to find these two factors. I'm going to get rid of all the multiplication stuff now. The addition stuff, maybe. So that I have some room to work on my next step. So next, we're going to keep the 6x squared. We're going to keep the minus 5, but we're going to split that negative 7x up to be those two factors I found. We're going to split it up to be negative 10x plus 3x. Again, if we're trying to do the FOILing process backwards, it was originally the split up stuff, and then it came down to be one term. Well, we have to do that backwards. We have to take it from one term and split it up into the two pieces. So now we have to do something called factoring by grouping. We're going to look at the first two terms and the last two terms separately. We're going to do what's called the greatest common factor. So looking at 6 and 10, we're going to ask ourselves, is there anything that divides into both 6 and into a 10? Well, thinking about it, I know 2 divides into both of them. So they would both divide by 2, and they both contain an x, so we're going to put a 2x. Now when we're doing this greatest common factor, the greatest common factor goes in front of just one set of parentheses, and then we put in the parentheses what we get when we actually do the division between these things. 6 divided by 2 is 3, x squared divided by x is just x. Over here, 10 divided by 2 is 5, x divided by x cancels. Okay, what about 3x and 5? What's the biggest number that would divide into both a 3 and into a 5? Well, the only thing I can think of that divides into them at all is 1. So I would have plus 1 and then a new set of parentheses. And we divide again. 3 divided by 1, still 3. X didn't have anything to divide with, so we leave it. 5 divided by 1 is 5. Now hopefully you notice that the stuff inside the parentheses matches. That's the stuff that should go in the first part of your answer. 3x minus 5 is your first parenthesis there. Anything left over out front should go in your second parenthesis. So 2x plus 1 goes in the second parenthesis, and there's your final answer. Now if you're unsure if you did the work correctly, you could go through and FOIL it to see if it came up with the 6x squared minus 7x minus 5. You could go through and multiply it back out and check it. We're not going to do that, but that is an option if you would like to check your work. So here's another problem. Now on our last problem we skipped a step just because it was easier to start with fewer steps. What you should always check for with every single problem is to see if there's a greatest common factor starting off. Is there anything that divides into 6, 15, and 36? Yes, there is. All of those divide by 3. So again, greatest common factor goes in front. The stuff left inside the parentheses is what we get after we divide. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 15 divided by 3 is 5. No x's to divide with, so we leave it just there. 36 divided by 3 is 12. Now you'll notice this greatest common factor didn't have a letter. That's because only the first two had letters and the 36 did not, so it can't have a letter in common. So now our next step was to times the first and last term. So that was our 2x squared and our negative 12 in this problem, which would give me negative 24x squared. Then we have to find numbers that multiply to be the negative 24x squared and this negative 24x squared can be changed to whatever you're working with. So just in this one case it's negative 24x squared, but I put a line underneath so that you know, hey, that changes depending on what problem you're working on. And add to negative 5x Again, negative 5x can be changed. It depends on the problem. So, things that multiply to be negative 24x squared. 1 times negative 24. And again, I should actually include x's on those. 1x times negative 24x. If we try adding those though, that's going to be negative 23x. Doesn't work. How about 2x times negative 12x? Add those. 2 plus a negative 12, that's negative 10. Doesn't work. We're trying to make a negative 5. That did not work for us. 3x times negative 8. Add those together. That makes our negative 5. So those are our factors. So now we're going to write them in place of the 5. So now we're going to replace the middle term with the 2 factors we found. And now we need to factor by grouping. So when we're factoring by grouping, we look at the first 2 separately from the last 2. We say what divides into both 2x squared and 3x. Well, the only number that divides into both 2 and 3 is a 1. They both contain a letter x, so we're going to have a 1x. Now this 3 from before is still going to be part of our problem, but we can kind of ignore it till the very end if it's going to confuse you. Or you can leave it as we go along. Just know it's not really going to affect anything else. It's going to just stay there until the very end of the problem. So we have 1x was our greatest common factor. 2x squared divided by 1x is 2x. 2 divided by 1 is 2. 3x divided by 1x is 3. The x's cancel each other out there, and the x squared divided by x is just x for that first part. Okay, next one, numbers that divide into both 4 and into 12. Well, 2 works, but we want the biggest number. So we're actually going to use a 4. And if this first term out of our grouping is negative, we use a negative 4. So we have minus 4. Negative 8x divided by negative 4 is positive 2x. Negative 12 divided by negative 4 is 3. Again, you'll know that you're doing this process when you have matching parentheses. So now we can write our final answer. We know in our first set of parentheses the matching piece goes, 2x plus 3. And in the last set is all our leftover stuff. We're actually doing greatest common factor again, but our greatest common factor this time, the thing they had in common, was a 2x plus 3. So that 2x plus 3 went out front, just like when we had a greatest common factor here. Even though there were 2 1x's underneath, we just put 1 in front. Same thing, even though there are 2 2x plus 3's, we only put 1. And then they divide each other out, so you're just left with 1x minus 4 in the last parenthesis. And that would be your final answer. So that concludes our discussion on factoring trinomials.